Chapter 1. Alan Bower gazed into the sparkling water from the rail of the river cruiser, longing to trail his small hands in its flashing, seductive surfaces. Although he hadn't yet learned to swim, the water looked so inviting as they chugged slowly along the Cape Cod shoreline, past the scattered holiday homes half hidden among the lush vegetation fringing the little crescent-shaped beaches. Behind him, under a faded awning on the upper deck, a couple of dozen trippers were dancing to the sound of a bored pop group playing a succession of monotonous numbers. "Watch it now," droned the lead guitarist cum vocalist, staring woodenly at his microphone. Alan's fat elder brother Freddie wandered mischievously round the upper deck, draining the odd-abandoned cocktail glass with expert dexterity and keeping out of his parents' way. Every few minutes, Freddie crept up behind a pretty girl, took out a handful of nickels, dropped them onto the deck, and then knelt down on his bare, chubby knees to take a good long look up the girl's short skirt. Here it comes," shouted the singer, idly swigging his rum and coke between phrases. "Watch it now." "I'm watching," Freddie murmured fervently, mesmerized by a pair of frilly scarlet knickers, and snatching up his coins just in time to avoid having his ear clipped by a passing steward. Alan heard the song as if in a dream, watching his own private pictures in the water in a world of his own. The hard wooden rail hurt his bony elbows, but he was aware only of the water gleaming in the sunlight. It frightened him, and yet he loved it too. The boiling wash of the boat made it seem almost alive to him, and he closed his big dark eyes and listened to its chatter. "Here it comes, watch it now," it told him, as the water breeze ruffled his dark, curly hair and the boat moved gently up and down on the swell. Freddie had found more treasure near the bar. He scattered his nickels, like a croupier dealing cards, behind 3 giggling girls at the rail. But no sooner did he get into position than a skinny hand seized his ear and yanked him to his feet. "Freddie!" yelled Mrs. Bower, a neat woman in very ordinary clothes, with a careworn face and dulled eyes, holding onto her hat with her free hand. Freddie grinned innocently at his mother. "Gee, I just dropped something, Ma." "Ralph, talk to him," Mrs. Bower pleaded as her burly husband wandered over, and they walked their smirking son out of temptation's way. Ralph Bower, relaxed in open shirt and trousers held up with wide braces, and a hat on the back of his head, took a hand out of a pocket and slapped Freddie's head gently. Mary Bower dragged Freddie across to the rail on the other side of the deck. "So listen to your father. Come on over here. We can see Cape Cod," she cried, shielding her gray eyes. Ralph Bower shook his head half-heartedly. "We were just on Cape Cod," he mumbled, and shuffled off towards the bar, hands in pockets again. Mrs. Bower looked around the deck for Alan. She saw him doubled over the rail, staring fixedly into the wake. "Alan, sweetheart, do you want to see Cape Cod?" she called, holding Freddie firmly with her other hand. Alan shook his head without looking around. "All right, darling, you know where we are if you do," she waved, steering Freddie towards the bar after her husband. The crude music jangled in Alan's mind, and suddenly he wanted to just blot it all out. "Here it comes," he whispered, climbing onto the rail as if in a trance. Throwing up his slender arms, he jumped and vanished into the lovely silence of the welcoming water. Somebody screamed. Then more and more people shouted and crowded to the rails and clustered at the windows of the lower deck. Bells rang, a whistle blew. At the stern, the water churned furiously as the propeller reversed. Several lifebelts hit the water. With a gasp of wordless horror, Mary Bower turned, grabbed her husband and dragged him out on deck. Oblivious of the fuss, Freddie was once more on his hands and knees among the nickels on the bar floor, staring upwards wide-eyed. Alan, too, gazed upward at the sunlit surface, his hair rising from his scalp like weed, his smiling mouth open in wonder as he sank to the bottom, waving in the clear water. But then he breathed in and panic hit him. He started flailing desperately towards the light. Something took his hand. A smaller hand clasped his, and the panic vanished. Alan looked into the smiling face of a girl, young like himself, with lagoon blue eyes and sinuous blonde hair trailing behind her. He felt himself being lured away, and he gave himself up to the feeling with joy as the girl drew him gently along beside her through the pearly water. On the boat, the band had stopped playing. Ralph and Mary Bowers stood hunched by the rail, screaming Alan's name over and over again. A sailor dived off the foredeck. Freddie knelt, wrapped in mysteries. Suddenly Alan felt afraid. The girl unclasped her hand and turned sharply away from him, her face twisted with anxiety. Immediately Alan began to sink again, gulping water. The girl disappeared as he lashed his arms and legs helplessly, crying dumbly for help. Then a powerful arm embraced him. He was pulled strongly upwards, and seconds later hands were carrying him aboard, faces pressing close, and voices shouting with relief. "Hey, a towel! Somebody give me a towel!" his father bellowed. "Why'd you do that, Alan?" Mary Bowers sobbed, dabbing his hair and cradling his head. "Why'd you do that?" Alan let them dry his hair and dab at his sodden clothes. He just sat by the rail, gazing steadfastly at the placid water as the boat got under way again, and the group clattered into a rock number under its awning. Far out in the bay, he saw the little golden head break surface for a moment, as if in farewell. A desolate sense of loss and of longing gnawed away inside him as he watched the strange girl dive out of sight. Then the towel slipped down and covered his eyes. Unseen by anyone, the girl reappeared and then dived again. No sooner had her head vanished than a pinkish fin glinting with iridescent scales flicked briefly out of the water in a bouquet of silver spray. Then it too vanished. Chapter 2. It was the peak of early morning business in the wholesale fresh produce market along the wharves of New York's East River. In the distance across the Brooklyn Bridge, Manhattan's glass and steel skyline shimmered like a promised land, but here paper and plastic garbage blew everywhere. Workers humped loaded crates and drove forklifts like dodgems. People haggled over deals, grabbed a hot dog with one hand and the phone in the other, and lost their tempers over bruised peaches and fermenting grapes. And everywhere among the open-fronted two-story warehouse buildings, voices rose in a continuous babble of warnings, threats, and complaints. "Hey, Bauer, where are my goddamn cherries?" In front of Ralph Bauer and Sons, top-quality produce, fresh daily, a large, rangy man of about 50, with sparse graying hair and a lined, leathery face, was standing, feet wide apart, among the crates, yelling into the busy warehouse. He looked to be at the end of his tether, and nobody was taking any notice of him. Eventually, Alan Bauer appeared. He was casually but smartly dressed in jeans with a shirt, tie, and sports jacket. He had grown into a slim, athletic man of 28, not tall but hard and wiry, with thick, dark hair slightly curly, fine eyebrows, and a sensuous mouth. His sensitive brown eyes registered trouble as he jogged over to his irate customer, armed with a clipboard and ballpoint. "Sorry, Mr. McCullough," he said soothingly. "They came in, but there was some fog upstate, and the highway patrol stopped." McCullough loomed over him like a cliff. Where are my cherries, you son of a bitch? If I don't get my cherries in 5 minutes, you don't get your money and you starve and you die, he promised, the sinews in his neck nodding alarmingly. Alan nodded and grinned unhappily, looking anxiously around the chaotic store. His eye caught a young Puerto Rican with unshaven face and a woolly bobble hat who was tasting a pineapple. "Jerry!" he cried, rushing over to him. "Where the hell are Mr. McCulloch's cherries?" Jerry blinked the sharp juice out of his eye. "They're right here," he muttered. "But you gotta take a look at them," he warned. "Be right back," Ellen waved cheerily, leaving McCulloch still yelling for his cherries. "Show me the worst, Jerry," he sighed. Jerry led him across the warehouse to a stack of crates where a scrawny fruit grower in dungarees and a stained hat was furtively picking out the absolute disasters. Alan stared at the rotting fruit with a doomed expression. "Where the hell did you grow these, Augie? Under your arms?" he demanded. "They're just snails with stems. Get 'em out of here." A telephone bell had been ringing endlessly. Alan walked away to the wall phone with Augie trailing after him. "Yeah, this is Bauer," he said, turning his back on Augie's protests. "Oh, hi, honey. What's up?" "Look, we had a lot of rain," Augie whined, "so the cherries got a little slime." "Hey, honey, I can't hear. Can I call you back?" Alan shouted into the phone. "And you agreed to take 'em off my hands." Alan swung round indignantly. "When the hell did I agree to that?" "Not you, your brother, Freddie," retorted Augie. "I can't hear you, Victoria. God damn it," Alan shouted back down the phone. "Yeah, honey, well, this is what I'm doing here is important too. I'll call you right back." He hung up, his eyes blazing. "So my big brother bought your goddamn cherries?" Augie nodded cunningly. "Sure, we was playing poker. He had 2 pairs and I had a flush, but Freddie didn't have no money, so we worked this out, see?" Before Alan could vent his frustration, a sudden shrill screech of tires, followed by the sound of splintering wood, sent him running out to the front, just in time to see Freddie prizing his enormous frame out of the driving seat of a smart red Porsche whose front end was completely buried in cabbages and shattered crates. "Who put this goddamn fruit here?" demanded Freddie Bauer, shoving his way past the white-faced McCulloch, who had narrowly escaped being flattened in the pile-up. "By the way, I'm just fine if anyone's concerned." In his vast purple velvet suit, matching cravat, gold-buckled shoes, and with his heavily beringed fingers, Freddie couldn't have looked more out of place on the wharf. "Good morning, Freddie," Alan called out with icy sarcasm. His elder brother flung out his huge, barrel-like arms in greeting and whooped with triumphant glee. He was clutching 2 handfuls of magazine copies. "I made it, baby," he announced, his jowls quivering with delight, and his youthful eyes as bright as diamonds as he waddled into the warehouse. "I'm in Penthouse. They printed my letter." Just then McCulloch barged his way in front and seized Alan's arm. "Bauer, I want a simple yes or no," he muttered through capped teeth. Alan nodded helplessly. "Just one more second," he pleaded, watching Freddie apprehensively. "I'm in for 'em. They printed my letter," Freddie chanted, waving the magazines as he bulldozed among the workers. "The story's entitled A Lesbian No More, and they printed every word I wrote. It's a really beautiful story. And I want copies given to everyone," he cried, thrusting copies into people's hands all around him. "Hey, well, listen, I'm very happy for you," Alan told him, pulling himself free from McCulloch's tenacious grip and attempting a smile. Freddie embraced Augie enthusiastically. "Great game the other night. We'll do it again sometime," he exclaimed. "Hey, listen, everyone. This guy is a great poker player. He cheats like a son of a bitch." Alan glanced sidelong at the stack of cherries. "He sure does," he laughed dryly, grabbing Freddie's sleeve and trying to steer him towards the stairs leading up to the office. "Listen, Freddie, you and me have to talk," he said firmly. Freddie suddenly looked scared, grimacing melodramatically. "Is it about the petty cash?" "It was the cleaning girl," he protested. "I don't care about the petty cash, Freddie." "You don't?" Freddie grinned childishly. "Well, okay then, it was me. I admit the whole thing." Alan shook his head impatiently. "I still don't care about it, Freddie." McCulloch looked on, stoking up with outraged frustration as Freddie cuddled his younger brother affectionately. "I just love this guy," Freddie yelled to the whole wharf. "Do you hear me? I love him. Give me a kiss," he murmured, pouting his big lips suggestively. "Come on, give your big brother a kiss." Nervous about McCulloch rather than embarrassed by Freddie, Alan backed off, shaking his head vehemently. Swinging his arm, Freddie seized Alan in a playful headlock. "What's up, baby? You too big?" he laughed, kissing Alan's hair. "Hey, folks, I just love this guy's head," he grinned. McCulloch finally lumbered over to them. Reaching into his jacket, Freddie took out a thick wad of notes and stuffed them into McCulloch's shirt pocket. "Hey, Curly, go wash my car," he scoffed contemptuously. McCulloch flung the money back. "Where are my cherries?" he whispered hoarsely. Shaking free from Freddie, Alan laughed hesitantly and pointed to the nearby crates. Yes, Mr. McCulloch, your cherries are right here, but believe me when I tell you that you are not going to be happy with what we've got for you today." McCulloch gaped at the pulpy fruit with glazed eyes. Then he turned malevolently on Alan. "And you believe me, Bower, when I tell you that you are ruined," he snarled. "Everyone's going to hear how you left me high and dry. You're a ghost in this city." Alan swallowed hard, racking his brains for a let-out. "Hey, how would you like some bananas?" he grinned suddenly. "At cost." McCulloch flung out a hairy paw. "Deal," he snapped. With a sigh of relief, Alan called Jerry over. "Set up our good friend Mr. McCulloch. Bananas at cost," he ordered. Then he hurried away towards the office stairs. But Jerry came running anxiously after him. "Alan, here, wait a minute," he protested. "I gotta get out of here early today. Remember?" Alan shut his eyes and slapped himself on the forehead. "Gee, that's right, Jerry. Today's your big day," he murmured warmly, thumping the boy encouragingly on the chest. "Sure is," Jerry grinned wryly. "Now don't forget, Alan. Ushers have to be there early." Alan smiled. "I'll be there yesterday," he promised. Freddie was right behind Alan as he stopped in the outer office at the top of the stairs to ask Mrs. Stimler, the secretary, if there were any messages. Mrs. Stimler was a vague, gray-haired widow with upswept bifocal spectacles, dressed in a hideous non-matching twin set. Instead of pearls, she wore a key on a string round her neck. Her hair was encased in a mottled plastic bath cap. Her silent typewriter was covered in dust, and her chaotic desk cluttered with bric-a-brac. She gazed at the brothers with kindly recognition as she carried on cutting out recipes from a woman's magazine. "Yes, your father called. He wants you to call him back," she reported in a high, swooping voice. Alan and Freddie exchanged raised eyebrows and shook their heads hopelessly. Mrs. Stimler, our father passed away about 5 years ago," Alan reminded her gently. Mrs. Stimler put down her scissors. "Right. Should I get him for you, Mr. Allen?" Alan clutched his head with long, sensitive fingers and blinked with the effort of keeping calm. No, I'll deal with it," he replied. You just get on with your work." Demurely, Mrs. Stimler picked up her scissors again and resumed her task. The two brothers went on through into the inner office. It was peaceful, in semi-darkness, with a couple of shaded lamps and the early sun slanting through half-open Venetian blinds. In a corner, an illuminated aquarium bubbled away quietly, its brightly colored inhabitants swimming endlessly to and fro in serene contentment. Alan glanced affectionately over at the fish, and then threw himself thankfully into the reclining swivel chair by his desk. Freddie tapped his forehead. "What's with Mrs. Stimler?" he asked. "Oh, she had a little accident over the weekend. Got hit in the head by some lightning." Freddie's huge body shook with stifled laughter. "Hey, Freddie, that's not funny," Alan frowned. "I'm sorry, Alan, that's not funny." Alan shrugged indulgently. "Besides, she's okay. She could still do things around the office," he claimed defensively. Freddie flopped into a chair. "Like what? Jumpstart a truck?" he suggested, guffawing mightily. Alan got up and went over to feed the fish. He scattered the grains of food with a graceful, almost religious gesture, and silently watched the fish popping up to the surface time after time. He stroked the glass tank lovingly with the back of his hand. "Jumpstart a truck," Freddie repeated helplessly. Alan walked across to him. "Freddie, what the hell are you doing down here today?" he demanded disapprovingly. Freddie shot him a sly sideways glance and paused for effect. "Maybe I went to the club last night," he hinted. "So what's new? And maybe I met Mr. Byright of Byright Supermarkets. And maybe we had a few drinks." Freddie leered suggestively. Alan stared at him, uncertain what was coming next. "And maybe, just maybe, we're his new produce suppliers," Freddie concluded, examining his fingernails casually. Alan wandered away and sank into his chair. "Freddie, I'm real proud of you," he said with emphatic sarcasm. "That's really great. Which store?" Freddie took out a large cigar. "Not which store, the whole goddamn chain," he announced, lighting up and puffing away smugly. Alan gripped the edge of his desk tightly. "I hope you're joking with me right now," he murmured weakly, tense with foreboding. Freddie waved his cigar. "Think big. Be big, my friend." Alan gritted his teeth and stared at his brother in silence. "He was a Green Beret colonel," Freddie elaborated grandly, "so I made up a little story about you being wounded in Nam, and now he wants to do business." Alan sat tight-lipped and ashen-faced. Freddie puffed away imperiously. "The guy's coming round here this morning to check out the operation." Slowly, Alan rose to his feet. "This morning?" he echoed incredulously. "Oh, that's just great, Freddie. This is only chaos down here today. Augie only brings me slimy cherries from upstate." "So what, brother? Jerry's only getting married this evening. Did you realize that?" "So what, baby?" Freddie persisted, standing up resentfully. "I was only out drinking with the Byright guy all night long. I have to pick up a tuxedo this afternoon. And here I am busting my buns all the way to 47th Street. God damn it, this is a big deal," Freddie yelled, beside himself. "Come on, Alan, you can handle it." "For crying out loud," Alan screamed, slumping back into his chair and punching the desktop. "Oh, sure, I'll handle it." Freddie glanced down at the desk critically. "You should clear up your desk. It always looks like a pigsty in here," he advised. "No problem, Freddie. Don't touch the desk." "Do what I do," Freddie insisted, rummaging among Alan's papers, "and throw it all in a drawer." "Don't touch. I have a system on this desk," Alan hissed, at the end of his patience. The phone buzzed. There was a tense pause. Then Freddie snatched it up. "Phone for you," he grinned helpfully. With a murderous look, Alan took the phone. Immediately his face froze with guilt. "Oh, hi there, Victoria. I'm real sorry, honey. No, I meant to call you right back. Hey, what's the matter? Your voice sounds kind of funny." Freddie had carefully picked up the extension and was sitting eavesdropping on the conversation. "What? You're moving out?" Alan exclaimed, biting his nails with anxiety. "Out of the apartment? Now, while we're talking on the phone?" He ruffled his hair helplessly. "Okay, I know we were going to talk about it, but Victoria, don't you think it is just a little impulsive?" he pleaded desperately. "Hey, honey, if we were married, you wouldn't just move out like this, would you?" Freddie listened. "Yeah, she might do just that," he chuckled. Alan threw him a blistering look. "Will you get off the phone?" he snapped. Freddie hung up, mumbling an exaggerated apology. No, not you, Victoria," Alan tried to explain. "I was just telling... Hey, listen, what am I going to say to... Why don't you tell a guy you're on the phone?" Freddie complained with cruel irony. Shrugging, he stubbed out his cigar and waddled out of the office. Alan listened for a long time in silence, wiping tears of shock and humiliation from his eyes, while Victoria made her speech of final rejection. "But Victoria, what do you mean, do I love you?" he butted in eventually. "Well, we met, and well, you moved in, didn't you?" "No, it's just that it's a very difficult and complicated thing to know." "Hey, do you love me?" he inquired plaintively. After a long pause, Alan took the receiver from his ear and stared at it, on the verge of sobbing his heart out. "Well, there you go," he shrugged, dropping it onto its buttons. He thrust his hands into his pockets and gazed at the aquarium, where the fish sported, brightly oblivious of his misery. And there she went. He stood there motionless for some time, watching the brilliantly colored creatures effortlessly twisting and gliding in their endless, sunlit dance. Then something jogged in his memory. He tried to concentrate and to bring it to the front of his mind, but it would not come. Like a word on the tip of the tongue, it lingered tantalizingly just out of reach. Chapter 3. In its tiny, tree-filled churchyard, the church provided an oasis of peace and greenness amid the downtown canyons of concrete and glass. The joyful pealing of bells and the glory of the late sun reflected off the tall office buildings all around, and the scent of hundreds of flowers rose like a blessing into the evening sky. Resplendent in gray tailcoat, stiff shirt, wing collar, and striped tie, Alan stood happily at his post in the porch as senior usher, directing the multitude of guests to their seats. "Hi there, anywhere but the first 3 rows, please," he repeated, light-hearted and smiling again after the traumas of Victoria's devastating phone call and the problems at the market earlier in the day. But his happiness was short-lived. The clink of nickels on the gravel outside alerted him to the arrival of Freddie. He ventured warily outside to find his brother, clad in lemon-colored topper and tails with gigantic carnation buttonhole, kneeling unashamedly behind a cluster of young ladies in brilliant dresses and full bloom. "Get up, for Christ's sake," Alan hissed, smiling unconcernedly at the milling guests as he tried to haul Freddie to his feet. "This was embarrassing when you were 10 years old. Now it's—" "Listen," Freddie muttered tipsily, following unsteadily as Alan guided him towards the porch. "If something works for me, then I stick with it." Alan kept silent and composed himself as best he could as he resumed his formal duties at the door. "So Victoria left, huh?" Freddie mused, oogling the flirtatious young beauties from afar. "By the time I came home, she'd already gone," Alan confirmed, nodding and smiling at an elderly couple who presented their invitation for inspection. "You know why she left me, Freddie? Because I didn't love her." "That bitch," Freddie spat contemptuously. The elderly woman turned and glared. Freddie bowed and grinned amiably. "She just had puppies," he explained, conjuring the excuse out of thin air. "Anywhere in the second or third row, please," Alan directed, with exaggerated politeness, shooting a withering glance at his rosy-cheeked brothers. Freddie turned to Alan, unaware of the look. "Alan, I got to get more involved in the business," he confided earnestly, "and I intend to. I really mean it this time. I know the business. I was there with Dad at the beginning, remember?" Alan nodded, praying that he'd be spared any further embarrassment. Freddie clutched his lapels fervently. I just need to know. Do we sell fruit and vegetables, or is it just fruit?" Before Alan could bring himself to reply, Freddie got distracted by a girl in a very low-cut dress. "Hey there," he greeted her, winking. "Hi there," said the girl. "Hey, Alan, where's Victoria?" Alan grinned bravely. "Oh, she's just sick and she couldn't make it today," he lied. "Oh, that's too bad." "Anywhere but the first 3 rows, Cindy." Alan turned back to Freddie. "Why didn't I love Victoria?" he demanded aggressively. "Can you answer me that? She had everything. She was bright, she was sensitive, she was beautiful. Hey, Alan. Oh, hi there. Anywhere but the first, where's our lovely Victoria today?" "The flu. Yeah, the bad flu. She's awful sick and she's not here. Give her our love, will you?" Alan raised his hands in an embracing gesture. "Oh, sure." He hugged his chest convulsively. "I can't even give her my love, Freddie. Something in here just is not working." Alan whimpered wretchedly, turning his face into Freddie's ample bosom. Freddie ruffled his brother's hair sympathetically. "There are worse organs not to be working, my son," he pointed out dolefully. At that moment, a sharp postgraduate type breezed up wearing a fraternity tie with a dumb-looking girl on his arm. "Hey, Alan, where's that gorgeous lady of yours?" he roared heartily. Alan swung round sharply. "She's not coming today, okay?" he shouted. "You want your money back?" Heads started to turn in the pews nearest the door. "Hey, Alan, I'm real sorry to hear. She left me," Alan blasted on recklessly. "She moved out, and now my life's a shambles. Okay, that's the news. You want the weather?" he yelled. "Anywhere but the first 3 rows." More heads had turned, and people were stirring uncomfortably further up the nave. Alan stood with head bowed, breathing hard, his fists clenched tight, struggling to regain his composure. Freddie put an enormous arm round his trembling brother and shook him gently. "Hey, you really should lighten up on that guy," he murmured. "That's the bride's brother." Inside, the organ had started to play with strident urgency. Chapter 4. In the dim, reddish lighting of the club reception rooms, the wedding guests were mostly all past dancing, and they were now lounging around in the plushy upholstered shadows, drinking, giggling, kissing with various degrees of intimacy, and some were sitting together or alone, simply staring into the lemon peel and ice cubes. Only one guest was lying across the bar cluttered with dirty glasses, face down in a bowl of pretzels, one hand clutching an empty glass. It was Alan. Beside him, a disheveled and maudlin Freddie was philosophizing in a morose monotone. "You see, drinking's really a question of algebraic ratios," Freddie declared, reaching for his screwdriver. "How drunk you get depends on how much alcohol you consume in relation to your body weight." He took a huge gulp and considered his popping waistcoat buttons. "See my point, Alan? It's not that you had a lot to drink, it's just that you're too skinny." He lifted his brother back onto his stool. Alan blinked at him unseeingly, his face mottled with sticky pretzels, and uttered a long and profound moan. Freddie sighed and waved to the immaculately red-jacketed bartender nearby. "Hey, Marceau, a bunch more drinks here, please." Alan finally opened his eyes and belched in almost melodic protest. "No, no, Freddie, I don't want to get drunk," he groaned through the clustered pretzels, listing precariously on the tall stool. Freddie grinned solicitously. "But you are drunk, Alan." "A sober person would have reached for the pretzels." Marceau set down 2 very large drinks. "Is he going to be there long?" he inquired wearily, as the band wailed some blues from the almost deserted dance floor and Alan slumped forward again. "I don't know," Freddie smiled. "Oh, I'm on the bar," Alan mumbled, blowing the tacky pretzels off his lips, "and somebody's on my mouth." "You should be so lucky," Freddie told him, lifting him off the bar and standing him upright. "And the stool's in your way. Let me move that for you." He moved the stool, and Alan immediately crumpled to the floor. "Oh, dear, you fell," Freddie taunted, taking another gulp of his drink. Alan started to drag himself to his feet and banged his head hard on the overhang of the bar. "You just love that bar," Freddie chuckled, taking Alan's head in his hands and gazing solemnly into his sad, dazed eyes. "You're not having a very good day, are you, baby?" "Wasn't that a beautiful wedding ceremony?" Alan sobbed, clutching onto Freddie's mountainous shoulders. "Oh, that sure was a beautiful ceremony," Freddie agreed, nodding his small round head and gazing past Alan at a couple of women in slit skirts with deep cleavages who were just wandering past looking rather free and easy. "It was," Alan insisted, the hot tears welling and blurring Freddie's bulbous zero-mostal features. "A lovely—" Suddenly Freddie's face had disappeared. Alan tottered forward as if searching for that rock of stability and sympathy. His knees encountered the back of a low settee, and he toppled over it and into the floor on the other side. "Gorgeous," agreed Freddie, mincing across to the 2 girls, pointing his small patent leather boots elegantly. "Hi there, how are you doing?" he asked cheekily, settling himself with some difficulty between them at their table. "Fabulous Freddie Bauer here." "Hi," they chorused amiably. Alan hauled himself painfully to his feet and eventually wove his way back to the bar, flourishing some orange blossoms he had found under the settee. He sipped his drink noisily and often. After a while, he noticed a young couple along the bar, smiling and nodding and glancing at each other more and more frequently. He started moving along the bar in stages towards them, watching them intently as he approached. "Where did you get those?" the guy was asking, shyly touching the girl's earrings. "My grandmother's. She gave them to me." "She did?" The guy inched closer to her. "Yes." "Oh, they are just beautiful," said the guy, inching closer still. Leaning his head on one hand on the bar, Alan waved the blossoms around in the couple's faces. "You two guys are in love, aren't you?" he mumbled, smiling dreamily. The young man glanced at Alan's open dress shirt and untied tie. "Oh, we just met," he snapped, signaling Alan with his cold blue eyes to beat it. Alan waved the blossoms again and sipped his drink. "That does not matter. See, I know about these things," he persisted in a rambling, clogged voice. "I can see, I can tell. You two guys, you're in love, and I think that's beautiful." The man turned to him. "Thanks," he said icily, and turned back eagerly to the girl. "I don't live too far from here," he murmured suggestively. "Do I expect too much out of life?" Alan demanded, gesturing extravagantly with his glass and sending a stream of bourbon and ice cubes into the girl's lap. "My dress!" the girl gasped. "I can't believe this." Alan dabbed at her breasts with his handkerchief. "I'm real sorry," he mumbled, dabbing lower and lower. "Hey, what are you doing?" the guy exclaimed, standing up. "Well, you go ahead and do it. You do it, I don't care," Alan droned on, mopping at the mess on the bar. The girl jumped up, staring at the vivid rust stain adorning her frock. "Both of you! You're both creepy," she gasped, flouncing away while the guy followed her, desperately trying to make things right again. The bartender took Alan's empty glass and wiped the bar. Alan leaned across to him. "I don't ask that much, do I?" he demanded, patting at his tear-stained cheeks with the wilting orange blossoms. "I mean, I don't ask to be famous or rich, and I don't ask to play center field for the New York Yankees or anything." Marceau deserted him to serve another couple who had just come up to the bar. "I just want to meet a woman," Alan confided to them along the bar. "I want to meet a woman, and then I want to fall in love, and I want to get married and have a kid, and I want to see him play a part in the school play. That's not much, is it?" He paused and blinked at the newcomers, waiting for some kind of reaction. But they pretended he wasn't there and gazed fondly into one another's eyes and drank long, slow draughts. "But I'm just kidding myself," Alan eventually whispered into the orange blossoms. "It's never going to happen. I'm going to grow old, and I'm going to grow lonely, and I'm going to die. And I'll be surrounded by a bunch of rotten fruit." Freddie's thunderclap guffaws stirred him from his miserable reverie. He slid off the stool and wandered across to their table. "Really? No kiddin'?" Flanked by the laughing lovelies, Freddie was chuckling away, smoking his cigar in short, urgent puffs and jingling his bracelets playfully. "No kidding." "Freddie, hey, Alan, I want you to meet some friends of mine. This is Connie and this is Jill." Freddie boomed expansively. He leered up at him. "You're Connie, Connie Tiger," he assured him. Alan nodded curtly, wiping his eyes and sniffing. "Hi," he said with a feeble smile. "Freddie, can I talk to you, please?" Alan pleaded quaveringly. "Oh, absolutely, absolutely," Freddie agreed, rising. Alan moved a little way off. Sure, sure, sure," giggled the girl. "I'll be right back, sweethearts, and then we'll whisper some more," Freddie assured them. He waddled over to Alan, rubbing his plump hands greedily together. "Boy, have I got some whispers for you. Oh, God, oh, God, oh, God," he sang. "Pack your bags tonight, my boy. We're going to Rio." In the background, the girls sat swaying sensuously to the music from the dance floor. "These two have got a timeshare condominium in Rio," Freddie babbled, nudging Alan with his broad hip. "We're going to share some time with them. Oh, yes, oh, God." Alan shook his head emphatically. He seemed suddenly a little less drunk and his tears were gone. "No, Freddie, I'm not going to Rio. I'm going to Cape Cod," he said, turning and walking away. Freddie stared after his brother, speechless. Then he scuttled after him. "What the hell are you talking about? Cape Cod?" he scoffed, grabbing Alan's sleeve. "Why would you go to Cape Cod?" Alan looked even more sober now. His eyes were bright with an idea rather than with tears. "I don't know, Freddie, because I like Cape Cod. I feel better up there, because—" Alan hesitated and shook his head very slowly. "I look at the water and I feel closer to something. I don't know." Freddie looked dumbfounded. "Cape Cod over Rio? Are you all right in there?" Alan nodded calmly. "Let me drive you." "No, Freddie. Let me drive you up there," Freddie insisted aggressively. "It's a long drive." "No." Freddie shrugged and cast his arms around as though he were reaching out for some unanswerable argument. "You got enough money?" "Yeah, I got plenty," Alan grinned. Freddie leaned closer. "Can I have some then?" he growled, jerking his head over towards his new acquaintances in the shadows. Alan smiled and patted him lovingly on both cheeks. Then he wheeled round and ran quickly out of the club. Chapter 5. Outside, Alan stopped dead as the fresh night air hit him like a blow from a boxing glove. He took a few deep breaths and then ran along the crowded Broadway sidewalk in search of a cab, his loose tie and open waistcoat flying and his hired tailcoat flapping off one shoulder. Eventually, he spotted an empty cab, and he dived across the busy street and thumped on the windows, causing skids and irate blasts on horns all around him. He yanked open the door and threw himself into the back. The cab started off automatically. "Where to?" asked the driver disinterestedly after they had gone 100 yards or so. "Cape Cod, Massachusetts." Alan was thrown violently forward against the glass partition as the cab dug its nose into the ground in an abrupt halt. "You break that and you pay for it," the driver threatened. Alan set himself up again, his forehead numb and his head splitting. "Oh, I'm so sorry," he shouted. "I usually don't enjoy smashing the glass with my face, you know." The driver looked at his unkempt passenger in the mirror, nodding wearily. "Okay, Mac, Cape Cod. That's about 300 miles. You got the cash?" he asked impassively. Alan rummaged around in the suit pockets and leaned forward, holding up a double handful of $20 and $50 bills like a sacrificial offering. He was instantly hurtled back into the seat as the cab leaped forward, wheels spinning, and roared out into the stream of late-night traffic in a wild and reckless U-turn. "What is this?" Alan yelled as he was thrown sideways. "The Indianapolis?" "This is Broadway," the driver yelled back, "and we're going north." Alan lay back and closed his eyes. Soon he was asleep and dreaming of the lazy light on the water and childhood memories of the smell of the sea. In the cold dawn light, Cape Cod was not quite as Alan had remembered it. A grayish haze covered the sky, and a strong onshore breeze was whipping up the water in the bay into jagged, froth-tipped waves which roared in up the beach in endless succession. Behind him, the crescent of still, flickering lights around the curve of the bay bore witness to the holiday home boom of the last 20 years, and a thick forest of bare masts swung and clattered around the extended wooden jetties in the harbor. But he gulped the bracing air bravely and stared across to the flat island in the distance. Eventually, the early sun bathed the island in a pale rose light, as though it were a special place, a sanctuary perhaps. Alan stood motionless in the sand for a long time, just gazing across the foaming bay at the promised land, a faint smile playing over his haggard face. New York and the market and Victoria seemed a lot more than 300 miles away now, and it was blissful. A little way along the beach, he had noticed a 40-foot tugboat tied up at a jetty. Now 3 men were struggling to unload 3 or 4 bulky wooden crates from the back of a pickup parked on the beach nearby. Alan eyed the solid tugboat with approval and then looked back out to the island. It was worth a try. Hands deep in the pockets of the crumpled suit, he wandered casually over to them. The unloading was being supervised by an academic-looking man aged about 35. He had thick, black, curly hair, black eyebrows, and a black Groucho Marx mustache. A pair of thick, black-rimmed spectacles was perched halfway along his enormous nose. He wore a thick, woolen polo-neck sweater and jeans tucked into gigantic gumboots. "Careful with that! Be careful with that!" he shouted at the 2 young fishermen helping him as they dropped a crate heavily into the sand. One lad was tall and lanky, the other short and solid. They gazed at their boss with slow, pale blue eyes. "What do you think you are handling there? This is delicate scientific equipment," he scolded them. He indicated a "this way up" arrow stenciled on the side of the crate, and now pointing into the beach. "Hold it! You see this? It means this end up," he explained painstakingly slowly. "You know what that means? It means this end up. So why don't you try holding that end up?" The 2 lads bent willingly to obey the instructions, but the man waved them away impatiently. No, get away, I'll do it myself." He grappled vainly with the heavy box for several minutes. Then he glared at the watching boys. "Give me a hand," he yelled. As they all struggled to right the crate, Alan strolled up to them. "Morning," he said brightly. The 2 lads looked up and nodded. "Mornin'," they drawled. Alan turned to their incongruous-looking boss. "Excuse me, sir, I've been dropped off on the wrong side of the beach, and I was wondering if you could take me over to the island?" he ventured politely. The man glanced at him suspiciously. "Well, we're not going to. We're taking the boat somewhere else. We're not going out there," he replied evasively, tugging at the capsized crate furiously. Alan looked around the deserted beach. "Well, have you seen anyone else along the beach here?" Impatiently the man gestured his lads back to work. "No, just myself and the moron twins," he grunted. The taller, elder boy straightened up again. "We're not twins," he drawled resentfully. Alan frowned at the assortment of crates still in the pickup. "What is all this stuff anyway?" he asked casually. The man sprang up and glared at him. "I knew it!" he shouted angrily. "Who sent you here? Dr. Ross from Chicago?" Alan blinked disconcertedly, his head still very tender from the previous night's events. "Who's Dr. Ross from Chicago?" Pushing his spectacles back up his nose, the man circled him warily, as if he were examining some dangerous forensic specimen. "Who is Dr. Ross?" he snorted, smiling sarcastically. "You're good, you are. I suppose you're just some harmless beachcomber who happens to wear a tuxedo." He laughed derisively. "How dare you try to horn in on someone else's research?" Alan shrugged. "Look, I'm just a guy trying to get out to the—" The man was now crouching in a hostile posture in front of him, almost like a karate expert. "Walter Kornbluth is not a man to be taken advantage of," he warned, with a sneer of contempt. "So you just stay out of my way, sonny." He lifted one end of the crate. "All right, let's move," he commanded. Shaking his head in bewilderment, Alan looked on while the younger brother took the other end, and they heaved the box onto the jetty with a supreme effort and carried it towards the wallowing tugboat. Meanwhile, the elder lad, dressed in an outsized boiler suit and woolen hat, came up to Alan's shoulder. "There's a guy down the beach there runs folks out to the island," he confided mournfully, his long face seemingly filled with unspoken troubles. "What's the name?" The boy gazed intently into Alan's eyes. "The guy or the island?" Alan stared back at Kornbluth, who was just stepping precariously onto the tugboat backwards. Then he squinted across at the sunlit island out in the bay. "Thanks, I'll find him," he waved, and set off towards the marina. Chapter 6. 2 Hours later, Alan was sitting nervously in the bow of a tiny dinghy as it puttered asthmatically across the bay. The wind had dropped, the sun was rapidly getting warmer in the clear sky, and the sea had calmed itself to a light, regular swell. It was all much more as he had remembered it. Nevertheless, he clung to the sides of the boat with white-knuckled hands and stared with queasy anxiety at the gigantic figure slumped in the stern, clad in sweatshirt, seaman's cap, and sawn-off jeans, who was steering the hesitant outboard with a complacent grin over his greasy face. "What's the matter, son?" the huge man inquired after a while. "You look a little nervous." Alan did his best to smile back, his body tensed like a spring. "Yeah, well, the truth of the matter is, Fat Jack, I never learned to swim," Alan croaked. Fat Jack examined him with beady eyes. "You can't swim?" he growled, cradling the tiller under his blubbery arm. "No, sir," Alan grinned bleakly, wishing the water could be flat as a plate glass window. Fat Jack shook his neckless head, gurgling with cynical amusement. Then he started to swing his vast 300-pound frame from side to side, causing the dinghy's gunwales to touch the water at each terrifying dip. "Then you wouldn't want me to do this," he grunted sadistically. Alan clung to the boat like a child to its pram, his mouth gaping in horror and his eyes wide. "Please, Fat Jack, please don't, no," he whimpered, panicking as water started to ship over the sides. "Look, cut it out, Fat Jack." "There's water coming in the boat," he screamed. The gross buffoon stopped rocking the dinghy. Okay, just having a little fun," he muttered with a sly wink. They puttered on for a while longer, and Alan began to relax a little, holding his gray face up to the sun and enjoying the warm breeze in his hair. His mouth still felt like a drain, but the sea air was at last beginning to make him feel cleansed and renewed. Then suddenly the motor hesitated, coughed several times, and then died completely. Immediately Alan became tense and anxious all over again. "What's wrong, Fat Jack? What's the matter with it?" Fat Jack shook his head in disgust and pulled the starter cord a few times, but the engine refused to start. "Guess when I rocked her I got a little water in the engine," he speculated, picking a hammer out of the bottom of the boat between his filthy feet. "I can fix it, son. I'm mechanical," he boasted complacently. Alan sat rigid in the bow while Fat Jack twisted round and banged the engine, cowling a few times with the hammer. Then Jack yanked the starter cord to and fro for a while. Still, nothing happened. "Did you fix it yet?" Jack shook his bullet head and spat copiously. "Nah, I'll have to go back for the other boat," he drawled, clambering awkwardly to his feet. Alan gasped as the dinghy rocked violently. "You'll what?" With surprising agility, Fat Jack dived over the side. Panic-stricken, Alan tried to dodge the sheet of water which sloshed into the tiny craft. Where are you going?" he yelled. Fat Jack was already moving easily away with a lazy backstroke. "Back to the dock," he shouted. "I can swim it. It's only a few miles. I'll be back with the little boat." Scarcely believing his ears, Alan glanced down at the 9-foot tub pitching and tossing under him. "This is the big boat?" he muttered. But Fat Jack was out of earshot, heading for the distant harbor. Much further out in the bay, the tugboat was riding at anchor, and Walter Kornbluth, now dressed in diving gear minus helmet, was peering intently through binoculars at the lone figure in the tiny dinghy. "I knew it! I just knew that guy came here to spy on my activities," he murmured ominously, his eyes narrowing with outraged hatred. Abruptly he swung around, almost losing his balance on the rolling deck. "I want to go down. I want to go down right now," he ordered. His crew, consisting of the two Slope brothers, studied the outlandish figure with skeptical amusement. "Hey, Mr. Cornbeef," drawled the elder. "Kornbluth," snapped Walter, snatching up the face mask and related items of equipment. "What you looking for down there? Buried treasure?" The brothers shook with silent mirth. Cornbluth flapped clumsily towards them in the unfamiliar gear. "You want to know what I'm looking for, boys? I'll tell you." Shoulder to shoulder, the boys shuffled forward eagerly. Forcing his way between them, Walter shouted into alternate ears, "It's none of your goddamn business. That's what I'm looking for. Now get out of my way." Pulling on the helmet and mask, Cornbluth checked out his equipment haphazardly. He slung an enormous, heavy underwater camera around his neck, gave the air line and nylon rope a tug or two, and tottered with sagging knees to the side. Diving in a travesty of the belly flop, he disappeared into the clear water. The brothers stared lethargically into the depths. Then the elder one pointed to the yellow tube hanging over the side. "Let's pee down his air hose," he suggested. Alan had plucked up the courage to crawl gingerly to the stern of the dinghy. He picked up the hammer and beat a frenzied tattoo on the battered cowling surrounding the ancient engine, but it had no effect. "Shit, shit, shit," he yelled, scowling at the silent machinery. He gazed around the bay in desperation. He could see one or two yachts and small boats, but they were all miles away. Gritting his teeth, he slowly stood up. He braced his foot against the stern board and took hold of the handle of the starter cord. Balancing himself as best he could, he gave a mighty tug. There was an explosive growl, and the engine erupted into life, suddenly driving the boat unexpectedly forward. Alan was thrown off balance, and the dinghy shot away from under him, hurling him into the water in a graceful arc. He flailed himself back up to the surface and dog-paddled frantically as the boat sped round in a tight curve. It circled him relentlessly as he struggled and screamed for help, swallowing water and tensing up in panic. As he fought to keep his head above the surface, he suddenly saw the boat coming straight at him, only yards away. "Jesus," he gasped, desperately trying to dive under and out of the way, but he was helpless in the tight tailcoat and boots. He heard the engine vibrating through the water as it drove the boat over him. The keel cracked him sharply on the forehead, and he sank like a stone upside down. Bright lights exploded in his head, but their fantastic strobing quickly faded to a numb and silent blackness as he sank down and down, without consciousness and without memory. His wallet slipped out of the inner pocket of the coat and opened like the wings of some small, undiscovered sea creature as it floated gradually to the pearly bottom. But slim hands gently took hold of Alan's nerveless fingers and without panic drew him quickly but calmly along through the bright water. Long, fair tresses brushed his face as the weed parted and the shoals of fish flashed away. Without knowing, Alan followed, and his body relaxed and yielded and gave itself up, just as it had done once before. Chapter 7. Somebody was hammering on the back of Alan's head. As he rose up through the increasingly intense layers of pain, a series of blurred images flashed blindingly behind his eyes. Freddie raining blows on him with rolled-up copies of Penthouse, Mr. McCulloch beating him over the head with a banana, Fat Jack smashing his skull with his hammer out in the boat. Gradually he realized that it wasn't someone hammering, but the sun beating down on his back. He tried to spit the gritty pretzel crumbs out of his dry mouth. Then he realized that it was grains of sand. He lay face down in the shallows for a long time, feeling his body washing slowly back to life and listening to the quiet, rapid rush of small waves around his feet. Eventually the banging in his head began to fade to a dull throbbing. With a croak of agony, he dragged himself up onto his knees. Last of all, he opened his eyes a fraction. Blinding white sand stunned him, but a sweet, warm breeze flooded his nostrils with the scent of grass and flowers. He peered cautiously out at what looked like a world of undulating dunes, green and blooming with brilliant flowers beyond the sand. For a moment, he thought he was dead. Part of him might be in paradise, but his head was surely in hell. Then the memory of the day before speedily returned when he glanced down at his sodden dress clothes. He recognized the feeling of dry, tight skin around the eyes as one of the symptoms of the earthly hangover. Purgatory, after all, he decided. Clenching his teeth, he tried to stand up, but his legs collapsed into a wobbling tangle. Eventually he got back to his knees and was about to try again, when suddenly something moved nearby on the skyline along the top of the dunes. He looked up and saw a stir of grass and leaves. Then he made out a mass of long, blonde, crinkly hair. He rubbed his eyes and blinked a lot. Now he could see a face in shadow, 2 piercing blue eyes, sculpted cheeks, and a wide, luxurious mouth. "Hello?" he groaned in a cracked, hoarse voice. The girl did not respond. She just gazed at him. Alan's head split into an infinity of questions. "Do you have any idea how I got here?" he muttered, wincing at the loudness of his own words. "Did you save me?" The girl rose from the grass. Her thick, tumbling hair shrouded her breasts and most of her body, but Alan realized that she was naked, except for a necklace of some kind. He managed to force himself onto his feet, despite the cruel throbbing behind his eyes. "Do you speak English?" he shouted, clutching his bursting temples. The silence of the figure made him think that, perhaps after all, it was a vision. He took a couple of groggy steps up the beach. Instantly the creature took fright and vanished along the dunes. Then she suddenly reappeared, running down the sand towards the water. When she reached the edge, she stopped and turned to him. Alan smiled. He thought she smiled. Then he thought she was walking towards him, her brown, silky body rippling like water. Between her bell-like breasts hung a golden necklace set with turquoise and with pearls. She glided up to him, put her slender arms around him, drew him towards her, and kissed him full on the lips with her strong but gentle mouth. Then she turned and ran lightly into the waves. For a moment, Alan was unable to move. Then he emerged from the trance-like daze and called after her. "Hey, come back! Please, just tell me who you are," he stammered, staggering into the shadows. But the radiant figure plunged into the water and disappeared. Soon she reappeared further out, the sun glinting on her hair and her glossy skin. Alan stumbled back and forth in the water, waving his arms and calling out to her. "I can't swim. Come back," he pleaded. "I've got to talk to you. Can I call you? What's your number?" The creature disappeared again. Alan shaded his hammering eyes and stared at the twinkling water, but it remained unbroken. "Why the hell didn't I ever learn to swim?" he repeated over and over through clenched teeth, ruffling his hair as he turned and waded back to the beach. Behind him, the girl suddenly arced out of the swell like a dolphin. As her head and shoulders plunged back into the water, a gleaming silvery fin flickered briefly above the surface like a blade, with a glimpse of a rainbow-colored tail beneath. Then it vanished. When Alan glanced back at the sea, there was nothing. He stood for what seemed hours on the dunes, just gazing into the bay. Then all at once, the words of a forgotten song came into his mind again. "Here it comes, watch it now." As the sun waned, the white sand no longer hurt his eyes so badly. "I just gotta stop drinking," he told himself, as he turned and wandered inland, away from the dunes. Out in the bay, the girl dived deeper and deeper among the weed-clad rocks beneath the spot where Alan had been thrown out of the dinghy. Eventually something caught her eye, and she reached into a narrow crevice and retrieved the wallet. It was as if she had known all the time that it was there. She hung motionless among the gently caressing fish and studied its contents with a smile of curiosity. Alan's credit cards were exposed in a transparent sleeve, and the girl focused eagerly on the recurring words, "New York." Something seemed to occur to her. She closed up the wallet and swam swiftly deeper and further out into the bay. Shoals of striped fish parted to let her pass, and then immediately closed together again, as if familiar with her presence. She glided through a gap in the rocks and suddenly froze, quite still but slowly drifting. At that moment, Walter Cornbluth turned and saw her. Through his face mask, his spectacles slid down his nose as he goggled in total disbelief at the apparition floating 70 or 80 feet away from him through the limpid water. For the first few seconds he was struck dumb. Then his mouth moved wildly. "It's her! It is a mermaid!" he yelled, his trapped voice deafening him inside the helmet. He struggled to manipulate the bulky camera he'd been using to photograph a nearby turtle, but just as he focused on the astonishing creature, his foot slipped and he dropped the valuable instrument onto the rocks. Then the glorious creature flicked her tail and swam powerfully away. Wait a minute, yelled Walter, his ears numb and his eyes popping like a frog's, as he watched the wide double crescent fin sweeping up and down at the end of the sinuous tail, driving the iridescent creature quickly out of sight. Maddened with frustration, he picked up the camera and aimed it uselessly into the empty water, stabbing at the shutter button in a futile frenzy. Then he grabbed his umbilical and started yanking it harder and harder, as if he were trying to commit suicide as a result of his misfortune, all the time screaming into his fogged-up mask a continuous war cry of vindication. I've seen her, she's here, she exists." The golden creature glided down among the reefs beyond the mouth of the bay until she came to a deep trench where a vast dark shape loomed against the sunlight above. It was the rotting hull of a wrecked three-master sailing ship, leaning at a sharp angle in its rocky grave, its masts and spar still bearing a few rags of sail and ends of shrouds. She swam through a gaping hole in its high stern and into the chart room, where rolled maps and sounding charts were still lying in place in their racks. Taking several maps down from the wall, the creature unrolled them and spread them out over the crumbling table. For some time she traced the wavering outline of the East Coast United States from north to south and back again. On one of the maps she found the words New York. Smiling, she compared the words with those on the credit card. Then she closed the wallet and gazed for a long time at the map, as if memorizing it. A turtle swam through the chart room, and she reached out and brushed its shell with her hand as it passed by close to her. Eventually she rolled up the maps and replaced them in their racks. Then she gave a flashing thrust with her tail and shot out through the hole in the stern and disappeared. Chapter 8. Late next morning, Alan walked into the market wharf and threaded his way silently through the maze of crated produce. Normally, he relished the smell of the newly arrived oranges and onions and all the other stuff, and he usually kept up a barrage of greetings and repartee with the other dealers and the workers. But today was different. He was late, his head hurt, and he felt totally disoriented. The white bandage round his head quickly became a cue for endless jibes and comments, which he steadfastly ignored, at least until he reached his office. "Hi," cooed Mrs. Stimler, glancing up from her crochet. "You're not early this morning, Mr. Bauer. And what happened to your head? Lightning?" Alan paused to pick up the modest pile of mail from her chaotic desk. No, Mrs. Stimler. Just a boat hit me." He opened his screwed-up eyes a little wider. Mrs. Stimler gazed back at him through her bifocals with remote sympathy. She was wearing her Playtex Cross-Your-Heart brassiere, size 40C, over the top of her nondescript mottled blouse. Mrs. Stimler?" "Yes, Mr. Allen." Alan stared at the snow-white lacy scaffolding splendidly supporting his secretary's considerable bosom for all to admire. He gave up. No, it's nothing," he mumbled. "So nice to have you back," she said with a coy smile. Alan nodded and walked through into his office to begin waging the day's unequal struggle against suppliers like Augie, partners like Freddie, and customers like Mr. McCulloch. Just across the river, on the sloping sunlit grass underneath the optimistic arm of the Statue of Liberty, stands Tonoga, the chief tour guide, resplendent in brown tunic, Sam brown belt, brown jodhpurs, brown mountie hat, and brown boots, was routinely shepherding the last boatload of sightseers before his lunch break. Behind him, the twin towers of the World Trade Center and the Manhattan skyline provided a dramatic backdrop for his bland patter. He cleared his throat and straightened his brown tie, his sallow round face settling itself into a neutral mask of educational zeal. "Welcome to the Statue of Liberty," he intoned, gesturing vaguely upwards. "The statue was a gift from the French people. It has come to symbolize hope for oppressed peoples everywhere." "It's green," some kid blurted out. Stan ignored the sacrilege. "Over the course of a century, Miss Liberty has seen the New York skyline, which once she dwarfed, rise in great mountains of stone and steel." "But she's looking the wrong way," another wag observed. As Stan droned on, the 2 or 3 dozen tourists gazed dutifully upwards. But behind them, a naked, golden-haired girl was climbing out of the water near the boat steps. She crouched below the parapet for a while until the sun had dried her body. Then she vaulted nimbly over the railing and stood at the bottom of the embankment, gazing around her with delighted astonishment. Her hair reached almost to her knees, and the wind caused the intricate necklace between her breasts to ring faintly like tiny bells. Her keen eyes took in the surroundings with eager excitement. Stan ushered his party towards the entrance in the base of the massive plinth under the statue. "If you'll kindly go inside, Miss Simpkins will continue the tour," he urged them, his mind more and more preoccupied with visions of pastrami on rye. "Okay, come on, here we go. Don't touch my hat," he warned some playful kid in a bilko voice. "Don't ever touch my hat." At that moment, a bunch of stragglers came up the grass slope from the landing stage. Stan checked his tie and reluctantly repeated his introduction. "Welcome to the Statue of Liberty. The statue is a gift from the French people. It has come to symbolize hope." Something highly irregular had caught Stan's eye down by the water's edge. He pretended not to have seen it. "Symbolize hope for naked women everywhere. Bocce balls!" he yelled, pointing at the golden lady from the sea. The group turned to look. The naked girl was walking slowly up the grass towards them, smiling at everything around her. Cries of shock, delight, outrage, disgust, disbelief, lust, and even indifference erupted on all sides. People from the main party deserted Miss Simpkins and came crowding outside to see what was going on. With the men in advance, most of the visitors ran off down the slope to greet the unscheduled attraction. "Hey, can I take your picture, miss? Lift your hair up higher so we can see." "My picture, take my picture," pleaded a silver-haired man in a check suit, putting his arm round the girl's shoulders and burying his mustache in her ear, as his blue-rinsed wife looked on in horror from the entrance above. "Was a gift straight from the French people. Hey, come on, you guys," Stan was shouting hysterically. By the landing steps, another man shoved his wife away from the 25-cent telescope and swung it right round to focus on the stunning figure as she advanced up the slope like a goddess with her followers. "Miss Liberty has seen the New York skyline." Stan battled to retrieve his audience from temptation as they flashed and clicked away with frenzied motorized shutters, cinecameras, and videos. Eventually, a couple of cops appeared and fought their way through the rapidly swelling crowd. "Get out of the way, let's see what's going on here," bellowed a red-faced Irish policeman. He grabbed the naked girl's arm with admirable professional detachment. "This here ain't California, miss," he growled. "We don't go for this kind of stuff up here." The girl stared blankly at him as if she did not understand a single word. As the cops led her quickly up to the entrance to the statue, the crowd jeered and tried to follow, but the doors were barred and they hung around restlessly outside. Half an hour later, they gave their heroine a tumultuous send-off, and she waved to them like a Hollywood star as the cops escorted her to a police launch clad in an outsize Miss Liberty t-shirt reaching almost to her knees. During the short crossing over to Manhattan, a long-suffering detective attempted to question the strange young woman. "She don't speak no English," the Irish patrolman informed him. "And you do?" The patrolman handed over Alan's sodden wallet, shrugging off the insult. The detective flipped through it cursorily. "Who is this guy, Bauer?" The patrolman shrugged. "Perhaps she mugged him." "Lucky guy." Freddie Bauer was in his element. Dressed in a flashy three-piece suit, complete with carnation buttonhole, and waving a large cigar, he had been showing Mr. Byright and his associates round the business. Meanwhile, Alan had done his best to clear up the office and get some kind of readable financial statement prepared. Mr. Byright, a shortish gentleman with a Ronald Colman mustache, rings on every finger, and wearing a Homburg hat with an overcoat thrown across his shoulders like a cape, seemed reasonably impressed. After they had toured the warehouse, he turned to his ebullient host. "Okay, is that enough, or do you want more?" he inquired in a nasal whine. Freddie held up his hands in ecstatic deference. "No, that's plenty, Mr. Byright," he boomed. "That's all the business we can handle right now." He offered to lead the way up to the office. "Shall we talk terms, gentlemen?" he suggested with a knowing smile. At that moment, Alan came wandering down the stairs looking pretty fragile. Jerry was at his elbow with some problem or other. "But I don't have the slightest clue to what's going on," Jerry complained, scratching his lank hair through his woolen hat. "And you haven't been married even 48 hours yet," Alan muttered to himself. He waved his hand in dismissal. "Don't worry about it, Jerry. We'll sort it out first thing in the morning," he decided wearily. Mr. Byright greeted him gravely at the bottom of the stairs. "Ah, Bauer, your brother told us about your unfortunate experience in Vietnam," he said solicitously. The 4 or 5 assorted heavies, clad in a variety of business attire, standing around Byright, contemplated Alan's bandaged head impassively. Alan gave Byright a puzzled, wide-eyed look. "What's that?" he replied absently. Freddie bustled over to Alan and leaned into him with an urgent grimace. That incident in Vietnam," he muttered. Remember?" Alan frowned in confusion at the intimidating semicircle of prize-fighter faces confronting him. "That grenade going off right in your helmet," Mr. Byright added with a bleakly sympathetic smile. "Does it still bother you, Mr. Bauer? You're wearing a bandage, after all." Alan gave Byright a sickly smile. He felt on the brink of screaming or running amuck and punching people. He was saved by Jerry, who was waving the wall phone at him. "Hey, Al, a call for you." He glared at Freddie and grinned charmingly at Byright and his henchmen. "Excuse me, gentlemen, I'll be a moment," and he went over and took the phone. Freddie and the others saw Alan's face undergo an amazing transformation as he listened to the caller. The thundercloud expression he had worn all day suddenly disappeared. He smiled, then he laughed and shook his head in happy disbelief. Okay, I'm on my way," he shouted excitedly, dropping the receiver so that it was left dangling at the end of the coiled cable. Alan raced past the astonished Byright contingent and the gaping Freddie and jumped into his car parked among the apple crates. Freddie waddled quickly after him. "Hey, Alan, where you going?" he demanded in consternation. "What the hell?" Alan shot forward, just missing a forklift coming into the warehouse, and careered away along the wharf, his hand hard on the horn. Freddie stared open-mouthed after him. Then he hurried back to his prospective customers with a smile of abject apology on his pale, perspiring face. "What happened there?" Byright demanded. Freddie thought quickly. "Telephone!" he suddenly exclaimed. "Telephone?" "Yeah, you see, he was on the phone in Nam when the grenade exploded, and ever since then, he runs and gets in a car and drives away," Freddie explained, as if his words were a model of logic. "Oh," said Byright, glancing round at his expressionless colleagues. "I don't know why, it just happens." "Oh." Freddie grinned at them and took a puff at his cigar. It had gone out. "Let's review this deal, shall we?" he suggested desperately. ushering his visitors upstairs.